Hey everyone, and welcome back. Tonight we're turning our attention to a corner of medieval life that rarely appears in tapestries or illuminated manuscripts. The quiet, demanding work of keeping clothes clean, or at least clean enough, in a world without running water, washing machines or modern detergents. So before we begin this gentle exploration of medieval laundry, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe if you appreciate thoughtful historical content. And I'd love to know where you're joining us from and what time it is there. There's something grounding about connecting with fellow history enthusiasts across different places and hours. Now, perhaps settle in with something warm to drink, and let's ease into this contemplative look at what it meant to wash clothes in the medieval world. When we pull our clothes from the dryer today, warm and clean and soft, we rarely pause to consider what a miracle this represents. The entire process from dirty to clean takes perhaps an hour of our time, most of it spent doing other things while machines work on our behalf. The water comes clean from pipes, the detergent is scientifically formulated, the temperature is precisely controlled, the results are predictable and thorough. Medieval laundry was none of these things. It was an undertaking of such magnitude that it couldn't happen frequently. It required resources that were always scarce, water in quantity, fuel for heating, time measured in days rather than hours, physical strength for hours of labour, and space for drying that might not be available when needed. The gap between dirty clothes and clean clothes was bridged not by machines but by human effort, multiplied across hours that seemed endless. But to understand medieval laundry, we must first set aside our assumptions about what clean means and what laundry day entails. We must enter a world where clothes were fewer, where washing them was an event rather than a routine, where the definition of clean was negotiated based on what was actually achievable rather than what was ideal. We must understand that medieval people weren't ignorant about cleanliness. They simply worked within constraints that made our standards impossible, and developed their own standards that made sense within their reality. This exploration isn't about feeling superior to our ancestors or marvelling at how far we've come, though those responses are natural. It's about understanding with patience and care what the work of keeping clothes wearable actually entailed in a world so different from ours. It's about recognising both the genuine difficulties of medieval laundry and the remarkable ingenuity people brought to solving the problems they faced. The story of medieval laundry is told in the wear patterns on ancient textiles, in the account books recording soap purchases, in the medical texts warning about the dangers of cold water, in the legal documents describing laundresses' rights and wages, in the small details of daily life that accumulated into a picture of how people maintained the basic dignity of clean, or cleanish, clothing. We'll examine the water that was used and where it came from. We'll understand the cleaning agents available and how they worked. We'll walk through the actual process, feeling the weight of wet fabric and the ache of hours bent over washing. We'll consider who did this work and what it cost them. We'll explore how often it happened and why so rarely. We'll look at the tools and techniques, the seasonal variations, the class differences, and the results that all this effort produced. Throughout, we'll maintain a gentle honesty, neither minimising the genuine challenges nor reducing medieval people to caricatures of filth. They lived in their world as competently as we live in ours, solving problems with the resources available, creating systems that worked within their constraints, and maintaining standards that made sense even if they don't match ours. The medieval laundry awaits our attention, not as a horror story or a curiosity, but as a window into daily life, into the quiet work that sustained households, into the gap between ideal and achievable, and into the human capacity to cope with conditions we would find impossible. Let us approach it with the respect it deserves, understanding it on its own terms before measuring it against our own, and finding in its details the texture of ordinary life lived centuries ago. So let's begin this contemplative journey into medieval laundry days, moving slowly through the processes and considerations, understanding with care what it meant to keep clothes clean when clean was hard to achieve and harder to maintain. At the heart of any laundry lies water, the medium through which cleaning happens, the substance that must touch every fibre to carry away dirt. In our modern homes, water appears at the turn of a tap, already cleaned and treated at whatever temperature we desire. Medieval laundry began with a very different relationship to water, one that shaped every aspect of the washing process. The first challenge was simply obtaining enough water for washing. Laundry required far more water than daily household needs. Not cupfuls or bucketfuls, but quantities measured in dozens of buckets or more. A single load of washing might require 30 or 40 gallons of water, possibly more for a large household's accumulated laundry. Each drop of this water had to come from somewhere and be transported to where the washing would happen. Wells served many households, but well water had to be hauled up bucket by bucket. Imagine the journey. Lower the bucket, wait for it to fill, haul it up with arms that burn from the effort, pour it into a carrying vessel and repeat. Then carry the full bucket, heavy, awkward, sloshing, to wherever the laundry would be washed. Make this journey 20 or 30 or 40 times before the washing can even begin. The labour of water gathering alone was substantial enough to make frequent laundry impractical. Rivers and streams offered more abundant water but came with their own complications. River water was rarely clean by our standards. Upstream, other villages disposed of their waste. Animals waded and defecated in the water. Dead creatures decomposed in it. Agricultural runoff carried soil and manure into streams. The water that looked clear might nonetheless contain contaminants invisible to medieval eyes. Yet river water had advantages for laundry. It was plentiful and required no hauling from depths. Laundresses could work at the riverside, washing directly in the stream or filling vessels from it, without the exhausting process of well hauling. Many communities had designated washing areas along rivers where women gathered for laundry work, the river providing both water and drainage. The temperature of water available was whatever nature provided. Wells offered relatively constant cool temperatures. Rivers ran cold, especially in winter when they might be uncomfortably near freezing. The only way to have warm water was to heat it, requiring fuel, vessels, and time. For large-scale laundry, heating enough water was a major undertaking that many households simply couldn't manage. Cold water washing, while less effective than hot water at removing oils and grease, was often the only option. The medieval laundress worked with water at whatever temperature the season provided, her hands growing numb in winter washing, the cold making the already difficult work even harder. The effectiveness of cleaning was compromised by temperature, but there was little choice in the matter. The quality of water varied by source and season. Spring water from certain sources was considered better for washing than others. Softer water, with fewer minerals, cleaned more effectively. Hard water, rich in calcium and magnesium, didn't work as well with soap, requiring more soap for less cleaning effect. Medieval laundresses learned through experience which water sources worked best for washing. Rainwater, when it could be collected in sufficient quantities, was prized for laundry. Soft and relatively pure, it worked better with soap than hard well water. Some households maintained barrels or cisterns to collect rainwater specifically for washing purposes. But rainwater collection required infrastructure and depended on weather. During dry periods, there might be no rainwater to collect. Stagnant water, from ponds or poorly maintained cisterns, could become contaminated with bacteria, algae and various other organisms. Washing in such water might actually make clothes less clean, transferring new contaminants even as it removed old dirt. The medieval understanding of water quality was limited, but experience taught which sources produced better results. The physical labour of water carrying fell primarily to women and children. Trip after trip, buckets sloshing, shoulders aching, backs straining under the weight. This was the invisible prerequisite to laundry. The time and energy spent just gathering water was substantial, and it happened before the actual washing even began. In winter, water sources might freeze partially or entirely. Drawing water from a frozen well required breaking ice first. Rivers might freeze over, making them inaccessible. The challenges of obtaining water in cold months added another layer of difficulty to winter washing, contributing to the seasonal nature of laundry frequency. Drought conditions made water scarce for all purposes. When wells ran low and streams diminished to trickles, water for drinking and cooking took priority over water for laundry. Extended dry periods could mean laundry was deferred for weeks or months until water became available again. The legality of water access also mattered. Some water sources were private, wells on lords' estates, springs on church land. Use of these sources might require permission or payment. Common water sources were shared resources, but access could be regulated or contested. The social and legal dimensions of water access affected when and where laundry could be done. Pollution increased over the medieval period as populations grew and urban areas became denser. Rivers running through towns received raw sewage, refuse from butchers and tanners, and various industrial waste. The water available for laundry in urban areas was often genuinely foul, creating a situation where washing clothes in contaminated water raised questions about whether the clothes were actually getting cleaner. Some households maintained their own washing water through a series of uses. Water used for an initial wash might be saved for a second use on less delicate items. Final rinse water might be kept for preliminary soaking of the next load. This conservation extended the value of water laboriously gathered, but it also meant that clothes weren't always rinsed in truly clean water. The drainage after washing created its own issues. Large quantities of dirty, soapy water had to go somewhere. In rural areas, it might be thrown out into yards or gardens. In towns, it ran into streets or drainage ditches, contributing to the general sanitation problems urban areas faced. The disposal of washing water was an environmental issue, though medieval people had no framework for understanding it as such. The relationship between water quality and cleaning effectiveness was understood empirically, if not scientifically. Laundresses knew that some water cleaned better than others, that temperature mattered, that certain sources produced better results. This accumulated knowledge was passed from experienced washers to learners, a body of practical wisdom about working with the fundamental element of laundry. Understanding the water situation reveals why medieval laundry couldn't be the frequent casual activity it is for us. The water alone, obtaining it, heating it when possible, using it effectively, disposing of it afterward, was such a substantial undertaking that it required planning and effort far beyond what we can easily imagine. The gap between our water reality and theirs was perhaps the single largest factor making medieval laundry so different from modern washing. Once water was obtained, no small feat in itself, the question became what to add to it to actually clean clothes. Medieval people had access to various cleaning agents, but none matched the effectiveness of modern detergents. Understanding what they used and how it worked reveals both the ingenuity of pre-industrial cleaning and its limitations. Soap existed in the medieval period, but it was very different from what we use today. Medieval soap was made through a process called saponification, mixing animal fats or plant oils with lye, an alkaline solution, and heating them together. The result was a harsh, alkaline substance that could cut through grease and oil, but was rough on both fabric and skin. The production of soap was labour-intensive. Lye was made by filtering water through wood ashes repeatedly, until the liquid became sufficiently alkaline. This process required specific knowledge about which woods produced the best ashes and how many filtrations were needed. The lye had to be strong enough to saponify the fats, but not so strong that it destroyed the soap in the making. The fats used in soap making were typically tallow, rendered animal fat from cattle or sheep. These fats were carefully saved, melted down, and clarified before being mixed with lye. The whole process of soap making required considerable skill, and poorly made soap might not clean effectively, or might be so harsh it damaged fabrics. The soap that resulted was often soft rather than hard, sometimes more of a paste than a solid bar. It had to be used sparingly because it was expensive. The labour and materials that went into making it meant soap represented a real investment. Using too much soap wastefully was economically foolish. Using too little meant clothes didn't get clean. The balance had to be learned through experience. For those who couldn't afford soap or couldn't make it, other cleaning agents were used. Lye water itself, the alkaline solution made from wood ashes, could be used directly for washing. It was effective at breaking down oils and grease, though it was quite harsh. Clothes washed in straight lye water needed thorough rinsing to remove the alkaline residue that would otherwise irritate skin and damage fabric over time. Urine, human or animal, was used as a cleaning agent, particularly for wool. The ammonia in urine breaks down oils and also helped set certain dyes. Stale urine, allowed to sit until the urea converted to ammonia, was more effective than fresh urine. Laundresses might collect and store urine specifically for washing purposes. The use of urine in laundry wasn't considered disgusting in the medieval context. It was simply a practical use of an available resource. The ammonia smell would dissipate as clothes dried, and the cleaning effectiveness made it a valuable cleaning agent, particularly for items that couldn't tolerate harsher treatments. Fuller's earth, a type of clay with absorbent properties, was used to clean wool fabrics. The clay absorbed oils and dirt from the fibres. Cloth would be soaked in water mixed with fuller's earth, Then the clay would be worked through the fabric and finally rinsed out. This method was gentler than alkaline washing, but required thorough rinsing to remove all clay particles. Soapwort, a plant whose roots and leaves contain saponins that create a soapy lather when crushed and mixed with water, provided a gentle natural cleaning agent. It was particularly valued for delicate fabrics that couldn't withstand harsh soap. However, soapwort was less effective than soap on heavily soiled items, and required more labour to prepare and use. Certain plants and herbs were added to washing water not primarily for cleaning but for scent or other properties. Lavender, mint, and other aromatic herbs might be used in final rinses to leave clothes smelling pleasant. These additions were more common among wealthier households that could afford such refinements. The alkalinity of medieval cleaning agents meant they were effective at removing oils but harsh on fabrics. The chemical action that broke down grease and dirt also gradually broke down the fibres themselves. Each washing took a small toll on the fabric, slowly degrading it. The lifespan of clothing was partly determined by how often it was washed. Frequent washing wore out clothes faster. Stains presented particular challenges. Different stains required different treatments, and medieval laundresses developed specialised knowledge about stain removal. Blood, for instance, was treated with cold water and salt. Grease might be treated with fuller's earth or with gentle heating. Wine stains might be treated with milk or with specific plant juices known to have bleaching properties. Bleaching, making white fabrics whiter, was achieved through exposure to sunlight after washing. Clothes would be spread on grass or bushes in direct sun, the ultraviolet light gradually bleaching the fabric. This was a slow process, sometimes taking days of sun exposure to achieve noticeable whitening. In cloudy regions or during winter, effective bleaching was difficult or impossible. The concept of clean was negotiated based on what was achievable with available cleaning agents. Clothes that we would consider only partially clean were acceptable if they were the best that could be achieved with medieval methods. The goal wasn't spotless perfection, but visible improvement, removing the worst dirt and odour, making clothes wearable again. The limitations of cleaning agents also affected what could be washed. Heavy wool garments, for instance, couldn't be frequently washed with harsh soap without being damaged. Delicate fabrics might be spot cleaned rather than fully washed. The nature of the cleaning agents available shaped decisions about what to wash, how often, and how thoroughly. Some items weren't washed at all, but were instead aired, brushed, or spot cleaned. The limitations of medieval cleaning agents meant that for certain fabrics, washing was more damaging than beneficial. People learned which items could be washed and which were better maintained through other methods. The rinse water after washing was crucial because inadequate rinsing left alkaline residues that would irritate skin and continue to damage fabric. But thorough rinsing required yet more water, adding to the already substantial water requirements of laundry. The trade-off between thorough rinsing and water conservation was another calculation laundresses had to make. The effectiveness of cleaning varied greatly depending on water quality, the specific cleaning agent used, water temperature, and the vigour with which the washing was done. Two laundresses might produce very different results with the same materials, reflecting differences in skill, knowledge, and effort. Laundry was a skilled craft, not a mindless task. Understanding medieval cleaning agents reveals the gap between what was wanted and what was possible. Everyone preferred clean clothes, but achieving cleanliness with harsh, limited cleaning agents was difficult and came at the cost of fabric longevity. The cleaning agents available shaped not just how laundry was done, but how often, creating a situation where preservation of clothing sometimes trumped cleanliness. The actual work of washing clothes in medieval times was an extended physical ordeal that began with preparation and continued through multiple stages of labour. Understanding the process reveals why laundry day was genuinely a day, or even several days, rather than the hour or two we spend on laundry now. Preparation began with sorting. Items that could be washed together were grouped, linen separate from wool, whites separate from colours, heavily soiled items separate from lightly soiled ones. This sorting required knowledge about which fabrics could tolerate which treatments, which items might bleed colour, and what order of washing would be most efficient. Soaking was often the first active step. Particularly dirty items might be soaked for hours or overnight before actual washing began. The soaking water might be plain water, lye water, or water with other cleaning agents. This preliminary soaking softened dried-on dirt and began the process of breaking down oils and grease, making the subsequent washing more effective. The soaking vessels had to be large enough to hold wet laundry, wooden tubs, barrels, or large ceramic vessels. These containers were heavy even when empty, and became much heavier when filled with water and soaking clothes. Moving them, if necessary, required considerable strength. The vessels also needed to be cleaned themselves, or they would add new dirt to the soaking clothes. After soaking came the washing itself. This was done by hand, working the fabric in the cleaning solution, squeezing and kneading it to force the cleaning agent through the fibres. The work was done standing or kneeling over vessels, backs bent, hands in water for extended periods. The repetitive motions, scrubbing, squeezing, kneading, went on for hours. Particularly dirty areas required extra attention. Collars and cuffs, which contacted skin and absorbed sweat and body oils, needed scrubbing. Stained areas were worked over specifically, sometimes with direct application of soap or other cleaning agents. The thoroughness of cleaning depended on how much time and energy the laundress could invest in each item. Some washing was done on a washboard or similar surface. The fabric would be rubbed against a ridged surface while wet and soapy, the friction helping to dislodge dirt. This was effective but also harsh on fabric, contributing to wear. The balance between getting clothes clean and preserving them was constantly negotiated. Beating was another washing technique. Wet, soapy clothes were beaten with wooden paddles or bats, the impact driving the cleaning agent through the fabric and helping to dislodge dirt. This technique was particularly common in areas with abundant river water, where washing was done at the riverside. The beating was rhythmic, repetitive work that could continue for extended periods. Treading, placing clothes in large vessels and trampling them with bare feet, was used for heavy items like bedding or for large quantities of laundry. The treader would step rhythmically on the wet, soapy fabric, their weight forcing the cleaning solution through the material. This was less harsh than beating, but still required considerable physical effort. After washing came rinsing, crucial for removing the soap or other cleaning agents. Rinsing often required multiple changes of water. The first rinse water would be murky with soap and dirt, requiring a second rinsing in cleaner water, sometimes a third rinsing for thorough results. Each rinsing cycle required handling the wet, heavy clothes, squeezing out the previous water and immersing them in fresh water. The weight of wet laundry was substantial. Water increases the weight of fabric many times over. Lifting wet sheets or heavy garments from washing vessels, squeezing them out, moving them to rinsing vessels, all required physical strength. Arms, shoulders and back muscles were taxed throughout the process. The wringing out of water between stages was itself a significant effort. Clothes had to be twisted and squeezed to remove as much water as possible before moving to the next stage. For large items, this might require 2 people twisting the fabric in opposite directions. The pressure needed to effectively wring out water made hands and arms ache. The final wringing after the last rinse was especially important, because clothes that were too wet would take days to dry, creating mildew problems. Getting clothes as dry as possible through manual wringing was hard physical work but necessary for successful drying. The stronger the wringer, the better the outcome. Throughout the process, hands were subjected to water, often cold for hours at a time. Skin would wrinkle and prune, sometimes crack or develop painful sores. The alkaline cleaning agents were harsh on skin, causing irritation or chemical burns with prolonged exposure. Winter washing was particularly hard on hands, which might become so cold they lost feeling. The posture required for washing, bent over vessels or kneeling at riverside, caused back pain and muscle strain. Hours in these positions left laundresses with aching backs, stiff shoulders and sore knees. The work was physically demanding in ways that left the body tired and sore for days after. For large households or for professional laundresses serving multiple households, the scale of labour was multiplied. Dozens of items might need washing, each requiring individual attention. The work could extend across multiple days, one day for washing, the next for rinsing, another for wringing and hanging, perhaps another for taking down dried items. The uncertainty of weather added stress to the process. If rain threatened, laundry had to be done when conditions allowed, which might not align with when it was convenient. Starting a wash only to have rain ruin, the drying was a waste of enormous effort. The timing of a laundry required attention to weather patterns and seasonal conditions. The space required for the process was considerable. Vessels for soaking, washing and rinsing needed to be set out. Clean space was needed for sorted piles of dry clothes awaiting washing and for wet clothes awaiting drying. Not all households had adequate space, making the logistics of laundry yet another challenge. The fuel for heating water, when hot water was used, had to be gathered and the fire maintained. Keeping water hot throughout a washing session required constant attention to the fire. The heat and smoke added to the general discomfort of the work. Someone had to tend the fire while others did the washing, another layer of labour requirement. Children might help with lighter tasks, bringing water, stirring washing vessels, wringing smaller items. But much of the heavy labour fell to adult women, whose bodies bore the cumulative toll of regular washing sessions across years. The physical cost of laundry work was written on laundresses' bodies, in worn hands, aching backs, and the particular kind of fatigue that comes from hours of repetitive physical labour. Understanding the process reveals why medieval laundry was so different from ours. What we accomplish with machines in an hour, they accomplished with human labour across hours or days. The transformation from dirty to clean required enormous physical effort, patience and endurance. The work was as demanding as many other forms of medieval labour, though it was often invisible or undervalued because it was women's work, done in private rather than public settings. The medieval laundress, bent over her washing vessel, hands raw from hours in water, back aching from repetitive motion, was performing essential labour that kept households functioning and maintained the basic dignity of clean clothing. The process she followed was the accumulated wisdom of generations, refined through experience into systems that worked within the constraints of medieval technology and resources. It was hard work, but it was also skilled work, requiring knowledge, strength, and perseverance. Understanding how often medieval laundry happened, or rather how rarely, requires setting aside our modern expectations of weekly or even daily washing. The labour, resources and time required meant that full laundry sessions were infrequent events, carefully planned and executed only when absolutely necessary or when conditions aligned to make them possible. For most medieval households, major laundry sessions might occur only a few times per year. Some sources suggest quarterly washing was common for ordinary households, 4 times annually, perhaps timed to seasonal changes. This meant that clothes and linens went weeks or months between full washings, accumulating wear and soil that we would find uncomfortable, but that medieval people accepted as normal. Wealthier households might manage monthly washings, though even this frequency represented significant resource investment. The labour of multiple servants, large quantities of water and soap, the disruption to household routine, all of this meant that even the wealthy couldn't wash as frequently as we do. Monthly was ambitious. Quarterly was more typical even for prosperous families. The seasonal timing of major washes followed practical considerations. Spring and autumn were preferred seasons for large-scale laundry. Spring washing cleared away the accumulated grime of winter, while autumn washing prepared for the cold months ahead. Summer offered good drying weather, but was also the busiest agricultural season when labour was needed in fields. Winter washing was avoided when possible, due to the difficulty of drying in cold, damp conditions. Between major washes, spot cleaning and airing maintained clothing as well as possible. A stained cuff might be dabbed with water or treated with specific stain removers. Clothes would be hung outdoors to air, allowing wind and sun to freshen them somewhat. These maintenance activities extended the time between full washings, but couldn't replace them indefinitely. Undergarments, linen shifts and shirts worn against the skin required more frequent washing than outer garments. These absorbed sweat and body oils directly and became uncomfortable when too soiled. They might be washed monthly or even more frequently for those who could manage it, while outer woolens went much longer between washings. The frequency of washing was determined by multiple factors competing against each other. On one hand, clothes that were too dirty became uncomfortable and potentially embarrassing. On the other hand, every washing damaged fabric and required resources that were scarce. The decision about when to wash involved balancing immediate discomfort against long-term preservation and resource availability. Weather was a crucial determinant of washing frequency. A stretch of sunny, dry weather might prompt an unscheduled laundry session, because good drying conditions were too valuable to waste. Conversely, extended rainy periods might force postponement of planned washing, allowing dirt to accumulate longer than desired. The timing of laundry was as much about weather as about need. Water availability also governed washing frequency. During droughts or in winter when sources froze, washing became difficult or impossible. The laundry schedule had to accommodate the realities of water access, meaning washing happened when water was available rather than when clothes necessarily needed it. Fuel scarcity affected washing frequency for households that heated water. If wood or other fuel was running low and had to be preserved for cooking and warmth, laundry might be postponed. The competition for scarce resources meant that laundry, while important, wasn't always the highest priority. The accumulation of sufficient dirty laundry to make the effort worthwhile also influenced timing. Because the labour investment was so substantial, it made sense to wait until there was enough dirty laundry to justify the work. Washing a few items was inefficient. Better to accumulate a substantial load and wash it all together. For households with limited clothing, washing required careful planning because people needed something to wear while their clothes were being washed and dried. If a family had only one set of outer garments per person, washing them meant either wearing very dirty clothes during the washing process or staying home until the washed clothes dried. This practical constraint limited washing frequency. Religious festivals sometimes prompted washing. Preparing for Easter, Christmas, or other major feast days might include laundering the household's clothing. These occasions provided a framework for ensuring washing happened at least a few times per year, even if the interval between washings was quite long. Life events, births, marriages, deaths, occasioned special washing. New mothers underwent ritual cleansing after childbirth, which included washing the birth linens. Preparing a body for burial included washing the death linens. Weddings prompted washing of the best linens and clothes. These events punctuated the regular washing schedule with additional sessions. Professional laundresses serving multiple households might do laundry more regularly than any individual household, but even they didn't wash daily. They might have specific days for specific customers, creating a rotation that meant each household's laundry was done perhaps monthly or quarterly, depending on the arrangements made. The infrequency of washing shaped other practices around clothing care. People learned to wear clothes in ways that preserved them, keeping outer garments away from dirty surfaces, removing clothes carefully to avoid stretching or tearing, brushing clothes to remove surface dirt. These practices extended the wearability between washings. The acceptance of body odour and clothing smell was partly a consequence of infrequent washing. When everyone's clothes smelled of accumulated wear, individual smell was less noticeable. The baseline for acceptable cleanliness was calibrated to what was actually achievable, not to an abstract ideal of freshness. Herbs and flowers stored with clothing helped mask odours between washings. Lavender, roses, and other fragrant plants were dried and placed among folded clothes, their scent providing some freshness. This was more common among the wealthy, but even poorer households might tuck herb sprigs into stored clothing if the plants were available. The economic calculation was stark. Washing cost time, labour, water, soap, and fuel, while also wearing out clothes. Not washing preserved the clothes and conserved resources, but resulted in discomfort and eventual filth. The frequency of washing represented the balance point between these competing concerns, and for most medieval people, that balance pointed toward infrequent washing. The psychological adaptation to infrequent washing is perhaps difficult for us to fully appreciate. We've been socialised to feel uncomfortable in clothes worn for more than a day or two. Medieval people, by necessity, developed different thresholds. A garment worn for weeks or months between washings was normal, and the accumulation of wear and smell was simply accepted until washing day arrived. Children's clothing might be washed more frequently than adults, because children were generally harder on clothes and got dirtier more often. But this frequency was still measured in weeks or months, not days. The practical challenges of washing meant that even children's evident need for cleaner clothes didn't always result in more frequent washing. Seasonal occupational demands affected washing frequency. During harvest season, when all able bodies worked long hours in fields, laundry might be postponed despite clothes becoming very dirty. The agricultural calendar took precedence over the laundry schedule. Washing would wait until after harvest was complete and time was available. Some items were almost never washed. Heavy wool outer garments like cloaks might go years between full washings, if they were ever fully washed at all. These items were maintained through brushing, airing, and spot cleaning. The assumption that all clothing should be regularly washed is modern. medieval practice was more selective. Understanding washing frequency reveals another dimension of the medieval relationship with clothing. Clothes were precious, representing significant investment of resources and labour. They were preserved carefully, worn until truly worn out, and washed only as often as absolutely necessary to maintain minimal standards of cleanliness and comfort. The infrequent washing wasn't ignorance or laziness, but rational response to the very real costs of cleaning clothes in a world without modern conveniences. The physical setting of medieval laundry shaped the experience significantly. Unlike our modern convenience of washing machines in homes or nearby laundromats, medieval laundry happened in various locations, each with its own advantages and challenges, determined by resources, season, and social position. Rivers and streams were the preferred location for much medieval laundry, particularly in warmer months. The abundant water eliminated the need for hauling buckets from wells. The flow of the stream could help rinse away soap and dirt. The flat rocks at the water's edge or in shallows provided natural washboards. Many communities developed designated washing areas along riverbanks where laundresses gathered to work. These riverside washing places became social spaces where women worked together, sharing labour on heavy items, exchanging news and stories, and creating community. The work was hard, but the company made it more bearable. The riverside location also kept the mess and water away from homes, preventing the flooding of living spaces that indoor washing might cause. But riverside washing had its difficulties. The laundress knelt or crouched on riverbanks for hours, often on cold, wet stone or muddy ground. The dampness seeped into clothing and bones. In spring and autumn, when major washing often occurred, the water was cold, making the work physically painful. Hands plunged repeatedly into icy water became numb and raw. The river's flow, while helpful for rinsing, also meant that items could be lost if not carefully held. A piece of clothing dropped into the current might be swept away, a disaster for households where every garment represented significant value. Vigilance was required throughout the washing process to prevent such losses. Wells within household courtyards or in village commons provided water for those not near rivers. Washing near wells meant hauling every bucket of water needed, but it allowed washing closer to home. In some households, large vessels would be filled and the washing done in the courtyard or a workspace near the well to minimise the distance water had to be carried. Dedicated washhouses existed in some larger manors and wealthy urban homes. These were structures, sometimes quite simple, where the messy work of laundry could be contained. A washhouse might have built-in vessels, drainage, and perhaps even heating facilities for warming water. Having such a dedicated space was a significant luxury, reflecting substantial wealth. Monastic institutions often had purpose-built laundries, where the community's linens and garments were washed. These laundries might be relatively sophisticated, with multiple washing stations, drainage systems, and nearby water sources. The regular monastic washing schedule and the large quantities of linens used in religious houses made dedicated facilities practical. Urban commercial laundries existed in some larger cities, where professional laundresses served multiple households. These establishments might be located near rivers or have access to wells. They often had equipment like large vats and drying racks that individual households couldn't accommodate. Sending laundry out to these commercial operations was an option for those who could afford it. For households without river access or dedicated facilities, laundry might be done wherever space allowed. A household courtyard, if one existed, could become a temporary washing station. Large vessels would be set up, water hauled to them, and the work done outdoors to manage the water and mess. The area would be given over to laundry for the day or days required. Indoor washing, when it occurred, was messy and problematic. The single-room cottages of poorer households had little space for large-scale laundry operations. Water sloshed on floors, creating mud in earthen-floored dwellings. The humidity from washing raised moisture levels in already damp living spaces. Indoor washing was avoided when possible, but might be necessary during foul weather. The church sometimes disapproved of Sunday washing, viewing it as inappropriate labour for the Sabbath. This meant that working people, who laboured 6 days a week, had limited options for when to wash. The prohibition against Sunday washing effectively meant washing had to happen on weekday evenings, or feast days when work was permitted to cease, times that weren't always convenient or practical. Seasonal location changes were common. Summer washing might happen at the river, taking advantage of warm weather and abundant water. Winter washing, when it couldn't be avoided, might be done indoors or in more sheltered locations, accepting the mess in exchange for protection from cold winds and freezing temperatures. The public nature of riverside washing meant that the work was visible to the community. Laundresses working at rivers were watched by passers-by, their labour and their clothes on public display. This visibility had both positive and negative aspects. Company and mutual support balanced against lack of privacy and potential judgment. Legal access to water sources mattered. Some rivers were common resources, but others ran through private property. The right to wash at particular locations might be contested or require permission. Disputes over washing rights occasionally appear in medieval legal records, revealing tensions over access to this essential resource. Drying locations were as important as washing locations. Clothes had to be spread somewhere to dry, on bushes, on the grass, on purpose-built racks, or over fences and walls. The drying area had to be relatively clean, spreading clothes on muddy ground defeated the purpose of washing, and ideally sunny. Competition for good drying space could create social friction. Public drying areas in towns meant that wet laundry hung in streets and squares, draped over any available surface. The visual landscape of medieval towns included lines of drying laundry, creating a patchwork of fabric moving in the breeze. This public drying was simply accepted as necessary, though it contributed to the general crowding and disorder of medieval urban spaces. The transportation of laundry to and from washing locations added another layer of labour. Dirty clothes had to be bundled and carried to the washing place. Clean wet clothes had to be carried home or to drying areas, and wet clothes were much heavier than dry. These journeys, repeated with heavy loads, were yet another physical demand of the laundry process. In winter, when riverside washing was impossible, alternatives had to be found. Some households might have cellars or outbuildings where washing could be done out of the freezing wind, but these spaces were often cramped, poorly lit, and inadequately drained, making the work even more difficult than usual. The lack of fixed, proper facilities for most medieval households meant that laundry was always somewhat improvised, done in locations that were adequate rather than ideal, accommodating to weather and available resources rather than following a consistent, convenient routine. The modern convenience of washing machines in heated, well-lit spaces with proper plumbing reveals how much the location and infrastructure of laundry matter to making it manageable. Understanding where medieval laundry happened helps us see the work not as an abstract task, but as a physical activity shaped by landscape, season, and social resources. The riverside laundress, kneeling on cold stone with numb hands in frigid water, was working in a specific place with specific challenges. The location wasn't just background, but an active factor in how difficult or manageable the work was. Medieval laundry was accomplished with tools that seem remarkably simple by modern standards. No machines, no complex mechanisms, just basic implements that extended human capability without replacing human labour. Understanding these tools reveals both the limitations of medieval technology and the ingenuity of working effectively within those limitations. The washing vessel was fundamental, large enough to hold water and clothes together, sturdy enough to withstand repeated use, and shaped to allow the laundress to work the clothes effectively. Wooden tubs were common, constructed by coopers using the same techniques that made barrels. These tubs might be round or oval, sized according to purpose and the household's means. Wooden tubs had advantages and disadvantages. They were relatively lightweight when empty, making them somewhat portable. They didn't conduct heat, so hot water stayed warm longer than in metal vessels, but wood could rot if not properly maintained, might harbour mould in damp crevices, and could splinter or crack with age and hard use. Ceramic vessels were also used for washing, large pots or basins that could hold water and clothes. These had the advantage of being impermeable and easy to clean, but were heavy and breakable. A dropped ceramic washing vessel was a genuine disaster, representing the loss of an essential tool that might be difficult to replace. Metal vessels, iron or copper cauldrons and tubs, existed in wealthier households. Metal conducted heat well, useful for hot water washing, but also made the vessels expensive and heavy. The risk of rust or corrosion meant metal vessels required maintenance. For most ordinary households, metal washing vessels were luxuries beyond reach. The washboard, in various forms, provided a scrubbing surface. This might be an actual board with ridges or simply a flat stone or wooden plank, against which fabric could be rubbed. The friction between fabric and board helped dislodge dirt but also wore down the fabric. The angle and technique of scrubbing had to be learned to balance cleaning effectiveness against fabric damage. Beating implements, wooden paddles, bats or clubs were used to pound wet laundry. These tools were shaped for the hand, sometimes flat, sometimes ridged, designed to deliver impact that would drive cleaning agents through fabric without, ideally, breaking the fibres. The skill lay in hitting hard enough to clean without hitting so hard as to damage. Brushes made from bristles or plant fibres helped with scrubbing and with removing soap residues during rinsing. These might be simple handheld brushes or larger implements for working on clothes spread on flat surfaces. The brushes had to be stiff enough to be effective, but not so harsh as to shred delicate fabrics. Stirring sticks, long wooden poles, allowed laundresses to stir clothes in hot water without putting hands in the scalding liquid. These simple tools protected hands from burns and made it possible to keep clothes moving in water too hot to touch. The stirring also helped agitate the clothes, improving cleaning action. Wringing tools helped extract water from washed clothes. These might be as simple as two cross sticks between which fabric was twisted, leveraging mechanical advantage to wring more effectively than hands alone could manage. Some households had more sophisticated wringers, devices with rollers that could be turned to press water from fabric passed between them. Buckets and carrying vessels for water were essential. These came in various sizes and materials: wooden buckets with metal hoops, ceramic jugs, leather bags. The carrier had to be sturdy enough to hold heavy water loads, but light enough that the carrier's weight didn't make an impossible burden. The handle design mattered. Poorly designed handles made carrying painful. Yokes for carrying water balanced buckets on either side, distributing weight across shoulders rather than straining arms. These simple devices made it possible to carry more water more comfortably, though learning to walk steadily with a loaded yoke required practice. In regions where water carrying was common, yokes were essential tools. Soap containers, wooden boxes, ceramic pots, cloth bags, kept precious soap protected from moisture and contamination. These simple storage containers preserved a valuable resource, ensuring that expensive soap wasn't wasted through improper storage. Drying racks, when they existed, provided places to drape wet clothes indoors or outdoors. These might be simple wooden frames or more elaborate constructions with multiple levels. Purpose-built drying racks were luxuries. More commonly, any available fence, bush or architectural feature was pressed into service as drying space. Clotheslines, ropes or cords stretched between posts or buildings, allowed laundry to be hung to dry. The simple technology of a stretched cord made efficient use of vertical space and allowed air circulation around drying clothes. The clothesline, simple as it is, represented a significant improvement in drying efficiency. Clothespins or pegs, if used at all, were simple wooden or bone pieces that held clothes on lines against wind. Many cultures didn't use pins, simply draping clothes over lines and accepting that wind might blow them off. The occasional loss of a drying garment to wind was part of the process. Irons for pressing wrinkles from dried clothes were heated solid pieces of metal, often flat-bottomed with handles. These had to be heated in fires, then used quickly before they cooled. Getting the temperature right was crucial. Too cool and they didn't work. Too hot and they might scorch fabric. Alternative pressing methods included simply folding clothes carefully while still slightly damp, or placing heavy objects on folded clothes to press them flat. Straining cloths filtered washing water, removing the largest particles of dirt and debris between stages. These simple pieces of fabric extended the usability of water, allowing it to be reused more times before becoming too dirty to be effective. The simplicity of medieval laundry tools meant that most could be made at home or by local craftspeople. A household didn't need to purchase complex, expensive equipment to do laundry. Basic wooden tubs, simple paddles, buckets, and lengths of rope sufficed. This accessibility meant that even poor households could manage laundry, though the results might be less thorough than what wealthier households with better tools achieved. But simple tools also meant more physical labour. Without machines to provide mechanical advantage, human muscle had to supply all the force needed for washing. Without automated wringing mechanisms, hands had to twist and squeeze. Without temperature control, the laundress had to endure whatever water temperature was available. The simplicity of tools placed the burden of work more heavily on human bodies. The maintenance of tools was itself a task. Wooden tubs needed repairs, New hoops when old ones broke, patching of cracks and splits. Brushes wore out and needed replacing. Buckets developed leaks. The tools of laundry required care to remain functional, adding another layer of work to the already substantial labour of washing clothes. The absence of specialised tools meant that laundresses often improvised, using whatever was available for purposes it wasn't specifically designed for. A cooking pot might serve as a washing vessel. A food stirring stick might stir laundry. This versatility was necessary, but also meant that tools were often less than ideal for their laundry purposes. Understanding medieval laundry tools helps us appreciate both the simplicity and the challenge of the work. These weren't sophisticated implements, but basic extensions of human capacity. Vessels to hold water, implements to pound and stir and scrub, devices to wring and hang and dry. They got the job done, but only through substantial human effort. The gap between medieval laundry tools and modern washing machines is the gap between human-powered and machine-powered work, and in that gap lies the difference between occasional arduous laundering and routine, relatively easy washing. The washing process didn't end when clothes came out of the final rinse water. The journey from wet to wearable involved drying, and often some form of finishing to make clothes comfortable and presentable. This final stage of laundry had its own challenges and requirements shaped by weather, available space, and the desired final appearance of clothes. Drying began with wringing as much water as possible from the washed items. The more water removed through wringing, the faster the drying, and the less likely mildew would develop. This wringing was hard physical work, particularly for heavy items like blankets or thick garments. Arms and hands ached from the twisting pressure required to squeeze water from saturated fabric. For very heavy items, two people might work together, each twisting in opposite directions, using combined strength to wring more effectively than one person could manage alone. This cooperative wringing was one of the moments where laundry work was obviously shared labour, requiring coordination and teamwork. The wrung-out clothes, still damp and heavy, had to be carried to drying locations. Inside a house, this might mean climbing stairs with armloads of wet laundry. Outside, it meant traversing courtyards or walking to drying areas. The physical demands of laundry continued through this transportation phase. Outdoor drying was preferred when weather permitted. Sun and wind were the medieval dryers, working slowly but effectively. Clothes were spread on bushes, draped over fences, laid flat on grass, or hung on lines if these existed. The goal was maximum exposure to air and sun while keeping clothes from touching dirty ground or being blown away by wind. The timing of outdoor drying was crucial. If clothes were hung too late in the day, they might not dry before evening dampness set in. If rain threatened, clothes might need to be brought in quickly, then hung again when weather cleared. The laundress had to monitor both the drying clothes and the weather, ready to respond to changing conditions. Sun bleaching, the natural whitening that occurred when white linens were spread in direct sunlight, was both desired and unavoidable. The ultraviolet rays gradually bleached fabrics, making whites whiter over time. This process took days of sun exposure, so bleaching was a gradual process that occurred across multiple drying sessions, rather than in a single laundry day. But sun exposure also faded colours and gradually degraded fabric fibres. The same sunlight that bleached linens white also weakened them. Coloured garments were ideally dried in shade to preserve their dyes, creating a need for both sunny and shaded drying areas. The organisation of drying space had to accommodate these different needs. Wind was both helpful and problematic. Brisk breezes sped drying considerably, allowing clothes to dry in hours rather than days, but strong winds could blow clothes off drying lines or tear them from bushes. Items might blow away entirely, lost in fields or snagged in trees. The laundress had to balance the benefits of wind against its risks. Indoor drying was necessary in bad weather or winter, but it had significant disadvantages. Medieval homes were often damp to begin with. Adding wet laundry raised humidity levels dramatically. The moisture could promote mould growth on walls and furnishings. The damp permeated everything, making living spaces uncomfortable. Indoor drying also meant that living space was filled with hanging laundry. The single-room cottages of poorer households became forests of draped fabric, limiting movement and making other household activities difficult. The smell of drying wool, particularly, could be quite strong, adding to the general sensory challenge of medieval indoor spaces. Drying racks near hearths allowed some heat to assist drying, but this required careful attention. Clothes placed too close to fires could scorch or even ignite. Finding the right distance, close enough for heat benefit, far enough for safety, required constant monitoring. The fire also had to be maintained at appropriate levels, consuming fuel that might be needed for cooking. The drying time varied enormously. In warm, breezy conditions, lightweight linens might dry in a few hours. Heavy wool garments could take days to dry thoroughly, even in good weather. During damp seasons, items might take a week or more to dry completely, remaining clammy and uncomfortable even when seemingly dry. Incomplete drying led to mildew, the musty smell and discoloration that developed when damp fabric was stored or worn before fully dry. Once established, mildew was difficult to remove and could damage fabric permanently. The importance of thorough drying was understood, even if achieving it was sometimes difficult. The rhythm of laundry day was partly determined by drying considerations. Morning washing meant clothes had maximum daylight hours to dry, but this meant starting the washing process very early, adding to the exhaustion of the work. The need to accommodate drying shaped the entire laundry schedule. Seasonal drying challenges meant that winter laundry was particularly problematic. Short daylight hours, weak sun, high humidity, and frequent rain meant that clothes dried very slowly if at all. This was one reason why winter washing was avoided when possible. The drying was so difficult that it wasn't worth attempting unless absolutely necessary. Once clothes were dry, finishing work began. Wrinkled fabric needed smoothing, though the medieval tolerance for wrinkles was higher than ours. For those who cared about appearance and could afford the effort, pressing or ironing smoothed garments into more presentable condition. The heated iron, solid metal heated in the fire and applied to fabric, was a tool requiring skill and care. Too hot and it scorched, too cool and it had no effect. The iron had to be used quickly before it cooled, then reheated and used again. The process was time-consuming and required constant attention to avoid accidents. Alternative smoothing methods included folding clothes carefully while still slightly damp, pressing them under weighted boards or stones, or simply accepting wrinkles as inevitable. The effort invested in smoothing depended on the importance of the garments and the time available for finishing work. Some items were stretched during drying to maintain or restore shape. Knitted or woven garments could become misshapen during washing. Careful stretching while damp could correct this. This stretching required knowledge of how fabrics behaved and how much force could be applied without causing damage. The final step was folding or hanging finished laundry and returning it to storage or use. Clean clothes were sometimes stored with herbs, lavender, rose petals, or other aromatics, to keep them smelling fresh. This was more common among wealthier households that could afford such refinements, but even poorer households might use available herbs if they had them. The satisfaction of completing a laundry cycle, seeing clean, dry, folded clothes ready for use again, provided some reward for the days of labour invested. The household could feel the accomplishment of having clean linens and garments, knowing that the essential work of maintaining cleanliness had been achieved, at least temporarily. But the satisfaction was likely tempered by the knowledge that this exhausting process would need repeating in a few months when the clothes accumulated enough dirt to require washing again. The cyclical nature of laundry meant that completion of one cycle was simply preparation for beginning the next. Understanding the drying and finishing stage reveals how thoroughly medieval laundry depended on conditions beyond human control: weather, season, available space, and time. The laundress could control the washing itself through her effort and skill, but the drying was a negotiation with nature, successful only when conditions cooperated. This dependence on weather was one more factor making medieval laundry unpredictable and challenging, adding uncertainty to work that was already demanding enough. The question of who performed medieval laundry work reveals important truths about gender, class, and labour valuation. Laundry was gendered work, falling primarily to women, but within that broad category, the specific circumstances varied significantly based on social position and economic resources. In most households, laundry was domestic work performed by the women of the family. Wives and daughters washed the household's clothes and linens, adding this labour to their other domestic responsibilities. For them, laundry wasn't a distinct occupation, but one of many tasks that maintained the household. The work was unpaid family labour, invisible in economic terms but essential to family functioning. The wife who managed the household typically oversaw the laundry, deciding when washing would happen, organising the work, and often doing much of the labour herself. Her authority in domestic matters included responsibility for keeping the household's textiles clean and wearable. This was recognised as skilled work requiring knowledge and judgment, even though it wasn't compensated. Daughters were trained in laundry work from young ages, learning by helping their mothers. A girl might start by carrying water or stirring washing vessels, gradually taking on more demanding tasks as she grew stronger and more skilled. By the time she married and established her own household, she would be expected to manage laundry competently. This knowledge transfer was an important part of female education. Servants in wealthier households often had laundry as one of their assigned duties. A household with multiple servants might have one specifically responsible for laundry, while in smaller establishments, laundry might be shared among servants with other responsibilities. These servants were paid wages, but the wages were often quite low relative to the demanding nature of the work. Professional laundresses existed in towns and cities, serving multiple households or institutions. These women made their living from laundry work, washing for customers who could afford to pay. Professional laundresses might work from their homes, with customers bringing dirty laundry to them, or they might go to customers' homes to do the washing there. The professional laundress occupied an interesting social position. Her work was essential and skilled, requiring strength, knowledge, and reliability. Yet it was also poorly compensated and low-status work, associated with the lower classes. The social regard for laundresses was complicated. They were needed, even depended upon, but not necessarily respected. Laundresses often worked in groups, particularly when washing at riversides. This collective labour provided mutual support, help with heavy items, company during long hours of work, shared knowledge about techniques and stain removal. The washing place became a social space where women could talk freely, away from male supervision, creating a female community around shared labour. The conversations at these washing places, the gossip, stories and information exchange, served important social functions. News circulated, reputations were made and unmade, collective knowledge was shared. The washing place was where women gathered information about the community, making laundry work a site of both physical and social labour. Male involvement in laundry work was rare, but not completely absent. In some regions, particularly rural areas, men might help with the heaviest tasks, carrying large vessels, wringing very heavy items, while women did the detailed washing work. In monasteries, monks did their own laundry or worked in communal laundries, showing that men could do laundry work when gendered divisions were less rigid. Professional male fullers worked with cloth in commercial contexts, though fulling was distinct from household laundry. Fullers cleaned and processed wool cloth as part of textile production, using urine and fuller's earth in large vats. This was heavy industrial work, socially acceptable for men because it was commercial and skilled. The gender line seemed to be drawn between domestic laundry women's work and commercial cloth processing men's work. The valuation of laundry work was paradoxical. It was essential. Without clean clothes, households couldn't function properly, skin health suffered, and social standards weren't met. Yet because it was domestic work performed by women, it was undervalued economically and socially. The importance of the work didn't translate into respect or compensation for those who did it. This undervaluation meant that laundry work rarely appears in historical records except indirectly. Account books might note payments to professional laundresses, but the work itself is rarely described. The countless hours that women spent washing their families' clothes are largely invisible in historical sources, known to us primarily through the wear patterns they left on textiles and occasional references in domestic management texts. The physical toll of laundry work meant that laundresses aged visibly. The hands roughened and damaged by years in alkaline water, the backs bent from hours of work over washing vessels, the general fatigue from repeated cycles of heavy labour. These marked professional laundresses particularly. Their bodies bore witness to the demands of their work. Children sometimes worked as laundry helpers, particularly in professional laundresses' establishments. A child could carry water, stir vessels, help with wringing, and gradually learn the trade. This was one way poor families supplemented income. Children's labour in laundry work contributed economically even if their wages were minimal. The elderly poor sometimes did laundry work as one of the few options available to them. When physical strength declined but some capacity remained, washing clothes for others provided small income. An elderly woman too frail for heavier work might still manage lighter laundry tasks, earning enough to supplement charity or family support. Widows lacking other means of support might turn to professional laundry work. The work required no significant capital investment. A few basic tools and access to water sufficed, making it accessible to women without resources. It was hard work but available work, providing survival income when alternatives were few. The social network among laundresses provided mutual support in times of need. If one laundress fell ill or couldn't work, others might help with her customers, understanding that they might need similar help someday. This informal mutual aid reflected the precarious position of women whose survival depended on their capacity for physical labour. Conflicts sometimes arose over laundry work, disputes about payment, accusations of theft. Laundresses had access to household textiles and might be suspected if items went missing, or arguments about work quality. These disputes reveal the tensions in the relationship between those who did laundry work and those who employed them, reflecting the power imbalances inherent in service relationships. The skills required for excellent laundry work were considerable. Knowing which fabrics needed which treatments, understanding stain removal, managing the timing and stages of washing, judging when clothes were dry enough. Yet these skills were rarely acknowledged as such. The work was seen as natural women's work rather than as skilled labour, despite the real expertise required to do it well. Understanding who did laundry work reveals the gendered division of labour in medieval society, and shows how essential women's work was undervalued both socially and economically. The women who washed clothes, whether for their own families or professionally for others, performed crucial labour that maintained basic standards of cleanliness and dignity. Yet their work was largely invisible, unremarked, and inadequately compensated. This invisibility is itself historically significant, showing how thoroughly women's domestic labour was taken for granted despite being absolutely essential. The seasonal cycle profoundly shaped medieval laundry practices, creating rhythms of washing that followed the weather as much as the household's needs. Understanding these seasonal variations reveals how dependent medieval people were on natural conditions and how they adapted their practices to work within seasonal constraints. Summer laundry, when it could be managed around agricultural demands, offered the best conditions. Warm temperatures made working with water more comfortable. Rivers and streams flowed reliably, providing abundant water. Long daylight hours allowed clothes to dry thoroughly in a single day. The sun's bleaching power was strongest, naturally whitening linens spread on grass or bushes. The warmth meant that even cold water washing was tolerable. Hands didn't become painfully numb within minutes as they did in winter water. The laundress could work longer without the physical distress that cold weather caused. The relative comfort of summer washing didn't make the work easy, but it made it manageable. Summer drying was reliable. Clothes hung in morning could be dry by evening, reducing the risk of mildew. The extended daylight meant work could begin earlier and continue later, accommodating more laundry in a single session. The predictability of drying was itself valuable. Knowing clothes would dry allowed planning and commitment to the work. But summer also brought competing demands. The agricultural season claimed all available labour for field work. Haymaking, grain harvest, vegetable tending, all required urgent attention during summer months. Laundry had to be fitted around these agricultural imperatives, done during brief lulls in field work or postponed until after harvest. Summer heat could be oppressive for laundresses working over hot water or standing in direct sun. The physical exertion of laundry work caused sweating, and there was often little shade at riverside washing places. Heat exhaustion was a real risk during summer washing, particularly for elderly or pregnant laundresses. Insects, flies, mosquitoes, wasps, were more problematic in summer, bothering laundresses and sometimes landing on drying clothes. These were minor nuisances compared to other challenges, but added to the overall discomfort of summer laundry work. Drying clothes might attract insects if they weren't monitored. Autumn washing took advantage of moderate temperatures and relatively predictable weather before winter's onset. The harvest was complete, freeing labour for other tasks. Water sources still flowed reliably. Daylight, though shortening, was still adequate for drying. Autumn was often a preferred time for major laundry sessions, preparing clean clothes and linens for winter. The cooling temperatures made physical work more comfortable while still allowing reasonable drying. Clothes hung in autumn sunshine dried more slowly than in summer, but faster than they would in winter. The season provided a sweet spot between summer's heat and winter's cold, but autumn also brought increasing rain and decreasing reliability of drying conditions. A washing session begun during a clear spell might be interrupted by rain, leaving clothes to hang damp for days while waiting for sun to return. The unpredictability of autumn weather made laundry timing somewhat risky. Winter washing was avoided when possible due to numerous difficulties. Frozen water sources made gathering water extremely challenging. The laundress might need to break ice on rivers or wells before water could be accessed. The physical discomfort of this preliminary work in itself was substantial. Working with cold water and cold weather was genuinely painful. Hands plunged into winter water became numb within minutes, making detailed washing work difficult. The loss of sensation meant hands couldn't judge whether they were gripping fabric securely or whether clothes were adequately wrung. Hands exposed to cold water repeatedly developed chilblains, painful inflammation and swelling. Indoor washing, necessary in winter to avoid freezing, created all the problems previously mentioned: high humidity, cramped working conditions, slow drying. The single benefit was protection from wind and the most extreme cold, but this benefit came at significant cost in discomfort and inefficiency. Winter drying was the greatest challenge. Clothes hung indoors might take a week or more to dry thoroughly, remaining damp and musty for extended periods. The dampness affected living conditions, making homes uncomfortable and promoting mold growth. Clothes might never fully dry, creating a cycle where nothing was ever completely clean or dry. Outdoor winter drying was possible only in brief spells of relatively mild weather. Clothes hung outside in winter froze solid, becoming stiff boards that couldn't dry until they thawed. Bringing frozen clothes indoors to thaw and continue drying was one strategy, but it was inefficient and added to indoor dampness. The shortened daylight of winter meant less time for drying, even when weather permitted outdoor hanging. Clothes put out at dawn might still be damp when darkness forced bringing them in. The multiple days required for drying increased the risk that rain or snow would undo the washing work. The physical toll of winter laundry was severe. Standing in cold water, working with numb hands, labouring in freezing conditions or in steamy, hot indoor spaces, all created genuine suffering. The contrast between the heat of washing water and the cold of the surrounding air was itself uncomfortable, creating temperature shock that was both unpleasant and potentially dangerous to health. Medieval people believed that exposure to cold after being heated, as in washing with hot water, then moving into cold air, could cause illness. This belief, while not scientifically accurate in their terms, reflected genuine risks. Chilling after exertion could indeed make one vulnerable to respiratory infections. The fear of illness from winter washing was based in real experience. Spring washing often represented the first major laundry session after winter. The accumulated dirt of months was addressed as weather improved and water sources thawed. Spring cleaning was a real phenomenon, not just a metaphor. Households emerged from winter with significant laundry needs that had been deferred during cold months. The lengthening days and strengthening sun of spring made washing more appealing and more practical. Rivers flowed with snowmelt, providing abundant water. The warming temperature made working with water tolerable again. The psychological relief of being able to wash effectively after winter's constraints was likely significant. But early spring was also unpredictable. Warm spells alternated with cold snaps, and rain could be frequent. Planning spring washing required watching weather carefully and seizing suitable days when they appeared. The frustration of false starts, beginning washing during apparent good weather only to have conditions deteriorate, was part of spring laundry experience. The seasonal rhythm of washing meant that clothes and linens went through cycles of cleanliness. Freshly washed in spring or autumn, they gradually accumulated dirt across the following months until the next washing opportunity. This cycle was accepted as normal. The expectation wasn't constant cleanliness, but periodic restoration of cleanliness within the constraints that seasons imposed. Understanding seasonal variations helps explain why medieval laundry frequency seems so low to us. It wasn't just that people didn't value cleanliness or didn't want clean clothes. It was that the practical ability to wash effectively was constrained by seasonal conditions that made washing impossible or impractical for significant portions of the year. The medieval relationship with laundry was partly a negotiation with weather and season, working within nature's limits rather than overcoming them through technology as we do. The experience of laundry in medieval times varied dramatically by social class, creating distinct worlds of washing that reflected and reinforced broader social hierarchies. Understanding these class differences reveals how even basic hygiene practices were stratified, with the wealthy enjoying advantages that made cleanliness more achievable, while the poor struggled with constraints that made it nearly impossible. Wealthy households had the resources to make laundry more manageable. Multiple sets of clothing meant that washing could be planned without the constraint of needing to wear clothes while they were being cleaned. A noble family might have several changes of linen undergarments for each member, allowing rotation while some items were being laundered. This abundance transformed laundry from urgent necessity to scheduled maintenance. The fabrics worn by the wealthy were often of better quality: fine linen, good wool, sometimes silk. These materials, while expensive, were often easier to clean than the coarse fabrics poor people wore. Fine linen washed more readily than rough hemp cloth. Good wool held up better to repeated washing than cheap, poorly processed wool. The quality of materials affected both the washing process and the results. Wealthy households employed servants specifically for laundry work. A large household might have laundresses whose primary or only responsibility was maintaining the household's textiles. These women did the hard physical labour while their employers enjoyed the results, without bearing the costs in physical effort. The separation between the beneficiaries of clean clothes and those who actually cleaned them was total. The servants who did laundry in wealthy households had access to better resources: ample water, quality soap, proper facilities, sometimes even dedicated washhouses. The work was still hard, but the conditions were better than what poor laundresses working independently experienced. The irony was that those who needed these advantages least had them most abundantly. Professional laundresses could be hired by wealthy households, particularly for major washing sessions. These women brought their expertise and their labour, washing the household's linens while household servants did other work. The ability to hire additional help meant that laundry could be done more thoroughly and more frequently than a single servant working alone could manage. The frequency of washing in wealthy households was higher than in poor ones. Monthly washing was achievable when you had servants to do the work, sufficient water sources, adequate supplies of soap and fuel, and enough clothing to allow rotation. The noble family might never wear visibly soiled clothes because items were washed before accumulating serious dirt. The drying and finishing of wealthy households' laundry received more attention. Clothes were carefully dried to prevent mildew, properly ironed or pressed to remove wrinkles, folded with herbs to maintain fragrance. The final result was clothes that not only were clean but looked and smelled clean, a standard that required time and care that poor households couldn't afford. Storage of clean laundry in wealthy households was better organised. Linen presses, chests with aromatic wood interiors, sachets of dried lavender, all helped keep clean clothes clean and fresh-smelling. The wealthy could preserve the results of washing more effectively, extending the time between washings without clothes becoming unacceptably dirty. Middle-class households, prosperous merchants, successful craftsmen, occupied a position between wealthy abundance and poor scarcity. They might have a servant who did laundry along with other household tasks, or they might send laundry out to professional laundresses. Their clothes were decent quality, not luxurious, but not rags either. Their washing frequency fell between the wealthy and poor, less frequent than nobles, but more frequent than peasants. These middle-class households had to balance the cost of laundry against other expenses, paying for professional washing services, purchasing soap, maintaining adequate cloth supplies. All required economic choices. Laundry was one expenditure among many competing for limited resources. The calculations about when and how to wash involved economic considerations that wealthy households didn't face. Poor households faced the harshest constraints. Few clothes meant washing was complicated by the need to have something to wear during the process. People might wash their outer garments while wearing their threadbare undergarments, then reverse this for the next washing. The lack of alternative clothing made the logistics of washing extremely difficult. The fabrics poor people wore were often of poor quality, coarse, loosely woven, poorly dyed. These materials didn't wash well. Cheap dyes might run, colours might fade, Coarse weaving might fray or tear. The very process of washing damaged clothes that were already low quality, accelerating their deterioration toward complete unusability. Poor households lacked resources for effective washing. Soap was expensive, so less was used or substitutes were employed. Water had to be hauled considerable distances. Fuel for heating water was unaffordable. The washing was done with cold water, insufficient soap, and minimal tools, creating conditions where thorough cleaning was nearly impossible. The labour of laundry fell to women who were already exhausted by other work. A peasant woman who had spent all day working in fields, then cooked and cared for children, had little energy left for the demanding work of laundry. Washing happened when it was absolutely necessary, done as quickly as limited time allowed, with whatever resources could be scraped together. Poor households' laundry was often done at rivers or common wells, in public view and shared facilities. Privacy was non-existent. The clothes being washed were visible to all, their condition, often quite shabby, on display. The public nature of poor people's laundry added a dimension of social exposure that wealthy households, washing privately with servants, didn't experience. The results of poor households' laundry were often mediocre at best. Clothes might be somewhat cleaner than before, but never truly clean by modern standards or by the standards wealthy contemporaries achieved. The visible difference between a noble's pristine linen shirt and a peasant's greyish, much-mended shirt was partly about laundering. The wealthy could achieve and maintain cleanliness that the poor could not. This visible difference in clothing cleanliness was a marker of status. Social position was literally written on bodies in the condition of clothes. A person's class could be determined at a glance by whether their clothes were clean, pressed and well-maintained, or dirty, wrinkled and shabby. Laundry, or the lack thereof, reinforced social hierarchy. Children's clothing showed class differences dramatically. Wealthy children wore clean clothes that were frequently washed and replaced when outgrown. Poor children wore hand-me-downs that were rarely washed and worn until they literally fell apart. The childhood experience of cleanliness or dirt was class-determined from the earliest ages. The urban poor faced particular challenges. In crowded cities, access to water was limited and contested. Riverside washing places were crowded and sometimes dangerous. Living spaces were inadequate for indoor drying. The urban poor's laundry challenges exceeded even what rural poor faced because basic resources were scarcer in urban environments. The ability to maintain clean clothes was thus not simply a matter of personal choice or diligence, but was structurally determined by economic position. Poor people weren't dirtier because they cared less about cleanliness, but because they lacked the resources to achieve cleanliness that required water, soap, fuel, time, and adequate clothing quantities. The class divide in cleanliness was economic before it was cultural. Understanding the class differences in medieval laundry reveals how thoroughly inequality penetrated daily life. Even something as basic as clean clothes was distributed unequally, with the wealthy enjoying cleanliness that poor people could only approximate. The dignity that clean clothes provide was itself a privilege, available fully only to those with resources to purchase it through labour, materials and time. Achieving clean clothes in medieval times required investments of multiple types of resources, each representing real costs that households had to somehow bear. Understanding what cleanliness cost helps explain why it was achieved so incompletely and so rarely. The price, measured in time, labour, materials and opportunity costs, was genuinely high. Time was perhaps the most significant cost. A full laundry session consumed enormous amounts of time, potentially days from start to finish when you included preparation, the washing itself, rinsing, wringing, drying, and finishing. Time that could have been used for other productive activities was instead devoted to the unpaid, invisible labour of cleaning clothes. The time cost included not just the active labour of washing, but also the preliminary work, gathering fuel, hauling water, heating water, setting up washing areas, preparing soap or other cleaning agents. These preparatory tasks might take hours before the actual washing could begin. The time investment in laundry was far greater than the direct washing time alone. The opportunity cost of laundry time was substantial. A day spent washing was a day not spent on other necessary household activities: food preparation, textile production, childcare, garden work, animal care. Every hour devoted to laundry was an hour unavailable for other productive labour. For households where every waking hour had productive uses, this opportunity cost was real and significant. Physical labour, distinct from time alone, was another major cost. The work was genuinely exhausting. Hours of bending, lifting, wringing, scrubbing. The energy expended in laundry work represented calories that had to be consumed, nutrition that had to be obtained from household food supplies. In households where food was barely adequate, the physical energy required for laundry was a significant expenditure. The physical toll on bodies accumulated over time. The chronic pain, damaged hands, back problems, and general wear from repeated laundry sessions represented a cost paid in bodily health. This wasn't a cost measured in coins, but in reduced physical capacity, in pain endured, in bodies aged before their time by hard labour. Water, as we've discussed, required significant effort to obtain. The labour of hauling buckets, trip after trip, heavy loads carried considerable distances, was itself a major cost. In regions where water was scarce, even the water itself had value beyond the labour of obtaining it. Using scarce water for laundry meant less water available for other purposes. Soap and other cleaning agents had to be purchased or made, both options representing costs. Purchased soap required money, a scarce resource for most medieval households. Homemade soap required materials, fats, lye, time, knowledge, and effort. Whether bought or made, soap represented a significant expenditure. The scarcity of soap meant it had to be used sparingly, leading to the paradox that the cleaning agent required for cleanliness was too valuable to use freely. The need to conserve soap meant that washing was less effective than it might have been if soap could be used generously. The cost of soap thus affected not just whether washing happened, but how well it worked. Fuel for heating water was another material cost. Wood, charcoal, peat, whatever fuel was used had to be gathered, purchased, or otherwise obtained. The fuel used for laundry was fuel not available for cooking or heating. In times or places where fuel was scarce, the choice to heat water for laundry was a significant economic decision. Tools and equipment, while simple, still represented investments. Washing vessels, buckets, brushes, wringing devices, all had to be obtained and maintained. For poor households, even these basic tools represented significant expenses. The need to preserve tools meant being careful with them, adding another layer of attention to the already demanding work of laundry. The wear on textiles from washing was a cost often overlooked but genuinely significant. Each washing damaged fabrics slightly, shortening their lifespan. In a world where clothing was expensive and cloth production labour-intensive, wearing out clothes through washing represented real economic loss. The trade-off between cleanliness and clothing longevity was an actual economic calculation. Some stains or types of dirt might be permanent or require special treatments that risked damaging the fabric. The decision about whether to attempt stain removal involved weighing the value of cleaner clothes against the risk of ruining them. Sometimes the cost of achieving cleanliness was deemed too high, and stains were simply lived with. The social costs were more diffuse but still real. In communities where laundry was done publicly, at rivers or common washing places, the condition of one's laundry was visible to all. Shabby, heavily mended clothes revealed poverty. The social exposure of public washing added a dimension of dignity cost to the practical costs of the work. For professional laundresses, the cost of doing laundry for others included the wear on their bodies, the time away from their families, and the generally low wages received for demanding work. They paid physical costs for economic returns that barely covered survival. The cost-benefit calculation for professional laundresses was often barely positive. The risk costs of laundry included potential for injury, burns from hot water, strains from heavy lifting, falls on wet surfaces, illnesses from prolonged exposure to cold water. These risks, while not guaranteed costs, represented potential additional burdens that could arise from laundry work. Health costs could arise from improper washing or drying. Clothes that weren't dried thoroughly before being worn could cause chills. Soap residue left in fabric from inadequate rinsing could irritate skin. The attempt to achieve cleanliness sometimes paradoxically created new health problems. The mental and emotional costs of laundry work, the tedium of repetitive labour, the frustration when results were inadequate, the exhaustion that extended beyond the physical into mental fatigue. These were real, even if they're harder to quantify. The emotional toll of endless domestic labour, of which laundry was one component, affected women's well-being. For households that sent laundry out to professional laundresses, the monetary cost was straightforward but still significant. Payment for laundry services competed with other household expenses. The decision to pay for laundry was an economic choice that had to be weighed against other needs. The total cost of clean clothes, when all factors were considered, was substantial enough that many households simply couldn't afford it frequently. The accumulated costs — time, labour, materials, health, risk, opportunity — added up to a price that exceeded what most medieval people could regularly pay. This is why laundry happened so infrequently, and why standards of cleanliness were so different from ours. Understanding the costs helps us see that medieval attitudes toward laundry weren't about ignorance or lack of caring, but about rational responses to genuine resource constraints. People made reasonable calculations about when the costs of washing were worth bearing and when they were prohibitive. The infrequent washing was a logical outcome of clear-eyed assessment of what cleanliness actually cost. After all the labour, resources and time invested in medieval laundry, what did the results actually look like? Understanding this requires setting aside our modern standards of cleanliness and appreciating what was achievable with medieval methods and materials. The gap between medieval clean and modern clean reveals much about the relationship between technology, standards, and the very definition of cleanliness. Clothes emerging from a thorough medieval washing were better than they had been, visibly cleaner, fresher smelling, with much of the accumulated dirt removed. For the people who wore them, this improvement was noticeable and appreciated. The contrast between pre-wash and post-wash was significant enough to make the effort feel worthwhile. But cleaner didn't mean perfectly clean. Stains that had set deeply into fabric might be lightened but not removed entirely. The greyish tinge that fabric acquired over time wasn't fully reversible with medieval cleaning methods. Clothes that started pristine white became progressively less white with each wearing and washing cycle, gradually moving toward grey or beige no matter how carefully they were cleaned. The effectiveness of cleaning varied by fabric type. Linen, the most common fabric for undergarments and household linens, cleaned relatively well with medieval methods. Its smooth fibres released dirt more readily than wool's complex structure. A linen shirt could be washed to a state that approached what we would recognise as clean. Wool was more problematic. The natural oils in wool, combined with its textured surface, held onto dirt stubbornly. Wool garments cleaned with medieval methods might look somewhat refreshed, but often retained embedded grime that was impossible to remove without chemical treatments not commonly available. Heavy wool outer garments were particularly challenging to get truly clean. The smell of clean clothes was different from what we expect. The natural smell of fabric, the lingering scent of whatever cleaning agents were used, the faint mustiness from drying in humid conditions, all combined into a scent profile that was distinctly pre-modern. Herbs stored with clean clothes added fragrance, but this masked rather than replaced the underlying smell. Without effective deodorizing agents, body odors absorbed into fabric during wearing weren't completely eliminated by washing. The clothes were cleaner and smelled better, but they didn't smell fresh in the way we understand it. That nearly odorless or pleasantly detergent-scented quality that modern cleaning produces. Medieval clean smelled like medieval clean, a distinct scent profile shaped by medieval materials and methods. The texture of cleaned fabric was also different from modern expectations. Without fabric softeners, clothes dried somewhat stiff, particularly if they had been washed in hard water or with harsh soaps. The fabric gradually softened with wearing and absorbed body oils, but fresh from drying clothes had a rough, board-like quality. This stiffness was simply how clean clothes felt. Linen became softer with repeated washing and wearing, one of the reasons linen was valued for undergarments. But new or infrequently worn linen could be quite harsh against the skin initially. The softness we associate with clean clothes developed through use rather than being present immediately after washing. Wrinkles were common in medieval clothing because effective pressing was difficult and time-consuming. The natural fibre fabrics used, linen, wool, cotton, wrinkled easily, and medieval ironing methods didn't produce the crispness we expect. Clean clothes might still be quite wrinkled, and this was accepted as normal. The medieval standard for acceptable appearance allowed for wrinkles that we would find sloppy. Colour retention was a challenge. Repeated washing faded colours, even when washing was done carefully. Dyes available in the medieval period weren't always colour-fast, and the alkaline cleaning agents used accelerated fading. Coloured garments gradually became paler versions of themselves, and this progressive fading was unavoidable. White items yellowed over time despite washing and sun bleaching. The combination of body oils, inadequate rinsing, and natural fabric aging meant that brilliant white was difficult to maintain. Household linens and undergarments gradually acquired a creamy or greyish tint that washing couldn't reverse. The medieval concept of white linen included shades we would call off-white or écru, where patterns were visible on cleaned clothes. The areas of greatest stress, elbows, knees, collars, cuffs, showed damage from both wearing and washing. The fabric at these points became thinner, more translucent, gradually moving toward holes that would need mending. Cleaned clothes might be clean, but were often visibly worn. Mending was evident on most medieval clothing. The patches, darns, and repairs that extended garments' useful lives were visible after washing, sometimes more visible, as clean fabric showed repairs more clearly than dirty fabric did. Medieval people didn't expect clothes to look new, they expected them to be maintained, and visible repairs were normal. The overall condition of clothes after washing reflected their quality and care history. Good fabric, carefully washed by skilled laundresses, came out relatively well preserved and clean. Poor fabric, harshly washed with inadequate resources, emerged damaged and only partially clean. The results of washing varied as much as the circumstances under which washing was done. For the wealthy, with good fabrics, ample resources and skilled laundresses, clean could approach what we would recognise. Clothes that looked fresh, smelled pleasant and felt comfortable. But even wealthy households couldn't achieve the bright whiteness, complete stain removal, and perfectly pressed appearance that modern cleaning produces. For the poor, clean clothes were clean by intent rather than appearance. They had been washed. This was what mattered. The fact that they still looked somewhat dingy, smelled less than fresh, and showed obvious wear was accepted because it was unavoidable. The effort to clean them had been made. This satisfied the moral and social obligation to maintain cleanliness, even if perfect results were impossible. The medieval understanding of clean was pragmatic and relative. Clothes were clean in relation to their previous state, clean relative to what was achievable with available resources, clean in the sense that effort had been made to remove dirt and restore wearability. Clean wasn't an absolute state, but a point on a spectrum, judged by standards that acknowledged real constraints. This pragmatic approach meant that medieval people could feel their clothes were acceptably clean, even when we would consider them quite dirty. Their standards were calibrated to their reality rather than to an impossible ideal. This wasn't lowered standards, but appropriate standards, recognition that cleanliness had to be defined by what could actually be achieved. The results of medieval laundry, clothes that were better but not perfect, cleaner but not spotless, refreshed but not transformed, reflected the balance between effort expended and outcomes achievable. The enormous labour of laundry produced real improvements that justified the work for those who did it, and benefited from it, even though the results fell short of modern expectations. Medieval clean was its own thing, defined by its own context and adequate for its purposes, even if it wouldn't meet our standards today. As we step back from this exploration of medieval laundry, we find ourselves with a clearer picture of what a fundamental task of daily life actually entailed in a world so different from our own. The journey from dirty to clean, which for us requires minimal effort and time, was for medieval people an undertaking of substantial magnitude, requiring resources carefully gathered, labour that taxed the body, and time that could have been used for other necessary work. The first and most natural response is gratitude. The washing machine in our homes or the laundromat down the street represents more than mere convenience. It represents a transformation of human experience. What took medieval people days, we accomplish in an hour. What required their sustained physical effort, machines do for us. What depended on weather and season for them happens year-round for us in controlled conditions. The gap between their reality and ours is vast and worth acknowledging. We are beneficiaries of centuries of technological development, from the invention of practical washing machines to the creation of effective detergents, from the building of water systems that bring clean water to our homes to the electrical grids that power our appliances. None of this is natural or automatic. All of it was built slowly, represents accumulated human ingenuity, and has liberated us from labour that once consumed significant portions of life. But gratitude alone isn't enough. Understanding medieval laundry also requires recognizing that the people who lived in that world were as intelligent, as capable, and as concerned with cleanliness as we are. They weren't dirty because they didn't know better, or because they didn't care. They developed sophisticated systems for managing cleanliness within the very real constraints they faced: limited water, inadequate heating, harsh cleaning agents, weather dependency, and the overwhelming physical demands of the work. The medieval laundress, spending days accomplishing what our washing machines do in an hour, was exercising skill, knowledge, and endurance. She knew which fabrics tolerated which treatments, how to remove specific stains when weather was right for washing, how to manage the complex logistics of a major laundry session. This knowledge was passed down through generations, refined by experience, and represented a real expertise even though it wouldn't be recognised as such in economic terms. The infrequency of medieval laundry, which seems unhygienic to us, was a rational response to genuine costs. When washing required days of labour, substantial resources, and dependence on favourable weather, frequent washing was simply impossible for most people. The standards that developed, quarterly or monthly washing rather than weekly or daily, reflected realistic assessment of what could be achieved rather than ignorance of what cleanliness required. The class inequalities in medieval laundry, the wealthy enjoying cleaner clothes more frequently, while the poor struggled with inadequate resources, mirror broader patterns of inequality that persist in different forms today. While we've largely solved the technical problems of laundry through modern technology, access to that technology remains unequal globally. The connection between resources and cleanliness still exists, just in different forms. Understanding the gender dimensions of laundry work helps us see continuities as well as changes. Laundry was women's work in medieval times, often undervalued despite being essential. While modern technology has made the work much easier, laundry remains predominantly women's work in many households, still often invisible and undervalued despite being necessary. The technologies have changed, but some social patterns around who does laundry work have proven more persistent. The environmental dimensions of laundry are worth considering too. Medieval laundry, for all its challenges, had minimal environmental impact. It used renewable resources, created no persistent pollutants, required no fossil fuels. Modern laundry, while vastly more convenient, comes with environmental costs we're still learning to address: water consumption, energy use, chemical pollutants from detergents. Neither system is perfect. Each has its costs, just distributed differently. Looking at medieval laundry also prompts reflection on our own relationship with clothing and cleanliness. We wash clothes far more frequently than necessary, often after single wearings even when the clothes aren't truly dirty. This practice, while made possible by easy washing, also wears out clothes faster and has environmental consequences. Medieval people preserved their clothes by washing infrequently. We might benefit from reconsidering how often washing is truly needed. The medieval tolerance for clothing that wasn't perfectly clean challenges our own standards. We've become accustomed to a level of cleanliness that would have amazed medieval people, and we sometimes judge as unacceptable states of cleanliness that would have been considered quite good in earlier times. Recognizing the historical contingency of cleanliness standards might give us perspective on our own practices. The community dimensions of medieval laundry, women working together at riversides, sharing the labour and creating social bonds through shared work, remind us that there were social benefits to systems that seem disadvantageous in other ways. The privatisation and individualisation of laundry, while more convenient, has also isolated what was once communal work. Neither system is simply better or worse. Each has different qualities. The seasonal rhythms of medieval laundry connected people to natural cycles in ways we're largely disconnected from now. The dependence on weather, the adaptation to seasonal conditions, the negotiation with nature. All of this is mostly absent from our laundry experience now. We've gained control and convenience but lost a certain responsiveness to and awareness of natural rhythms. Perhaps most fundamentally, understanding medieval laundry reveals how much work was required to maintain the basics of civilized life in the pre-industrial world. The clean clothes that signalled respectability and dignity required enormous expenditures of time and effort. This reminds us that the apparently simple and basic aspects of life we take for granted rest on foundations that aren't automatic, but were and are built through human effort. The medieval people who did this work, primarily women, often working in difficult conditions, rarely recognised or compensated adequately, deserve our recognition and respect across the centuries that separate us. They maintained households, preserved standards of cleanliness as well as circumstances allowed, and passed on knowledge and skills to the next generation. They made the best of their circumstances, exercising capability and creativity within real constraints. As we conclude this exploration, we might approach our next laundry day with new awareness. The clean clothes that emerge from our washing machines represent not just modern convenience, but also liberation from labour that once consumed days. The ease with which we achieve cleanliness is a gift of technology and infrastructure that many before us could barely imagine. Yet we might also remember with humility that achieving different results under different circumstances doesn't make us better than our ancestors, just more fortunate in the tools and resources available to us. They did what they could with what they had, creating systems that worked within their constraints. We do the same, just with vastly better tools. The gross truth about medieval laundry is that it was hard, time-consuming, resource-intensive, and produced results that wouldn't meet modern standards. But the deeper truth is that it was also skilled work, performed by capable people managing as well as they could within genuine constraints. Understanding this work on its own terms, without condescension but also without romanticisation, gives us both gratitude for our own circumstances and respect for those who lived so differently. In the end, medieval laundry was part of the texture of daily life in that world, one thread in the complex fabric of how people maintained themselves and their households. Understanding it helps us understand that world more fully, recognising both how far we've come and how the basic human need for cleanliness and dignity connects us across time to people whose daily experiences were so different from our own, yet whose fundamental concerns and capabilities were recognisably human, recognisably like our own.